On this week's episode of Lincoln to Local, Oklahoma Farm Bureau's Gage Milliman gives us an update on 3 water bills working their way through the Oklahoma legislature, in addition to bills that focus on noxious weeds and burn ban laws. Gage, it's hard to believe we find ourselves here in the middle of March already, and I know the Oklahoma legislative session just keeps on rolling. Where are we at in the session? What's the status of bills, and what do we have left to do to get kind of to the halfway point, the true halfway point of legislative session?
Yeah, like you say, things are moving right along, and we had a big deadline last week that all bills had to be through committee in both the House and the Senate. They got that done, and now those bills are moving forward, and this week 100% working on floor work, getting those bills out of their chamber of origin.
How much more time do we have before bills have to be off the floor of their chamber of origin?
So they basically have 3 weeks to get that done, this week being one of them that they just concluded. Next week is spring break, so we don't expect much work, if any, to get done next week. And then the following week, the Thursday of that week, will be a deadline for bills to get across the floor. So essentially, we look like we have about a week left to get those done.
With a lot going on, we're going to jump in and talk about some water bills. Of course, water is something, and the policy of water has been something that our members have been interested in throughout decades, and I know we still have a standing water working group even that's a specialized committee for us to discuss water issues. What are kind of these trio of bills that Farm Bureau is tracking right now? Kind of what's the status of those?
Yeah, like I say, that we've got 3 bills, 2 in the Senate and 1 in the House, and they are bills that our working water group met on regularly last year during session, came to some conclusions of what we would like those bills to look like, and all those legislators were great to work with and implemented some of those suggestions into their bills. And we currently have, like I said, 2 in the Senate. We've got Senate Bill 1928 by Senator Murdoch, and it's a bill that kind of simply creates a 5-year allocation, meaning you can pull groundwater and you're allocated so much per year. This would allow you to go over in a certain year as long as you didn't go over your total of 5 years. So it's something our members and our irrigators would really like to have, but this bill doesn't require them to do anything else over what they're already currently doing. There's another bill in the Senate by Senator Howard, Senate Bill 259, and it's one that does a lot of those same things, but it gives a little bit of power to the Water Resources Board to enforce some of that reporting of the measurements of those water and making sure that if you're going over that, if you happen to go over after 5 years, there's going to be some penalty involved with that. So both of those bills went through Senate Energy last week. The title was removed from them, which means those legislators are going to continue to work on those bills and see what they look like going forward. They're yet to be heard on the Senate floor. Like we said with those deadlines earlier, there's still time. But over in the House, we have House Bill 4459 by Representative Newton. And this is a bill that kind of all groups involved have kind of gotten behind, and we as Farm Bureau support this bill. Other groups have said they support this bill. Went through committee and oversight committee pretty easily, made it to the floor yesterday, and they pulled the title on it on the floor. So it was one that we thought would just kind of move right along, and it is still alive, but by pulling title, it tells us they're going to continue to work on that bill and possibly make some changes as well. But it did pass the floor yesterday. It's still alive, but it's continuing to be a work in progress on all those water bills.
A bill and an issue that we haven't talked about yet on Lincoln Local this year is a bill dealing with some additional noxious weeds potentially in the state of Oklahoma. What weeds are we talking about, and what would that do?
Yeah, well, like we said, talking about the timeline, so some of these bills are hitting the floor, as we mentioned with the water bill. Well, this is one that kind of came through committee somewhat quietly. There's not really any opposition to it. What it would do is add poison hemlock and kudzu to the noxious weed list. I believe in Oklahoma we only have a few thistles that are on that list, and if we can get these added to that, it just requires not only property owners but our counties and our highway or our state to control these weeds along the right-of-ways so they're not spreading onto our properties. And it's a bill we definitely support, and like I said, made it through those committees, was heard on the floor this week. Now it's headed over to the Senate to see if it can get through there.
After talking about this new bill, there's a bill that we've already discussed on Link to Local. It has to do with burn bans and the mechanisms that counties would have for adding or removing those. Kind of, if you can remind us what that bill is, what it does, and I know it's seen some action recently.
Yeah, it's House Bill 3406 by Representative Kelly, and it's updating those burn ban laws. Basically, what it does is it really gives that power to the county commissioners to implement those burn bans, and we know how important those are when we get in those high fire risk situations. We want to make sure that they can put those burn bans on when needed, but it would also allow some provisions for them to pull that burn ban off a little more quickly if a rain comes through or conditions become more favorable. So it would also give us more of a window to do some prescribed burns, those type of things to help manage our pastures, but as also help mitigate those wildfires in the future. So it's a bill we talked about before. It's one we support. There's been a couple other bills out there that are still alive, but they're not moving like this one is. And this one not only made it through all those House committees, but also made it across the floor. And it's been sent over to the Senate this week, and it'll start the process over there.
I know we're talking about bills that are working in the legislative process, even though we're not even halfway through. And already Farm Bureau is thinking about not just the next legislative session, but the upcoming election cycle that we're facing here in 2026 toward the end of this year. And Farm Bureau has been active and engaged this year with firing back up our Ag Fund state level PAC, or Political Action Committee. Where is Farm Bureau at in that process, and what are our leaders taking on as we go into the 2026 election cycle?
Well, as we know, in a lot of circles, but here in Farm Bureau, we don't ever get to finish one task before we start the next one. And that's where we are with this election cycle. Our Ag Fund Committee met this last week to put together some schedules on what it's going to look like going forward. We're going to get some information out to our counties after the candidates file. They'll file April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And then at that point, we'll know for sure who's running for all of these seats across the state, as statewide races as well as those Senate and House races. We're going to have a lot of new a lot of new faces going into legislative session next year. But the committee did meet. They're going to work on putting that schedule together, making sure our counties have plenty of time to review those candidates, make some decisions. Then we get into May. Our districts will meet. They will make those decisions on who we're going to support. They'll elect somebody from their district to represent them at the state level, and then there towards the end of May, the state committee will meet again and make those decisions and of who we're going to support as we head into those primary elections in June.
One thing I think is really neat and is worth calling attention to about this process we have with our Farm Bureau Political Action Committee is it's really a grassroots process. I mean, I've been to some of those meetings and people know kind of the scoop locally about who's running for state Senate and House seats, and there's a lot of great grassroots discussion. How does that really impact this process and make it a special one for us?
Well, it gives us a real advantage over some other entities that are looking for candidates to support or not support, because we have our members live in those communities. They're neighbors and sometimes friends with those candidates that are running, and they'll give us great insight on what we can expect out of those candidates, whether or not they'll make a good legislator or not. It's just invaluable for our members to have that input, and then we're always really good about getting behind good people, and that makes a good relationship if they're elected or when they're elected going forward as we work on policy in the future.
Well, with that going on and a lot of session left to go, we'll be looking forward to the next update from you on Link to Local, and we appreciate your time.
You're welcome.